This is Lachlan Marquet of the Washington Free Beacon, and you are listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
The ad says he doesn't have a horse in this race, but Retractor knows he does. Now he's got egg on his face. The donkeys on the left got owned by a kid. They can say it was a crap of Retractor.
And welcome back to Politinerds Radio. This is Doug Mataconis, and I'm here with Jazz Shaw, and we're talking to Ambassador John Bolton, and we've been talking about his trip this past weekend to New Hampshire and exploring a possible run for the White House. And Ambassador, we were just talking about foreign policy, which is obviously an area that you're very well familiar with and very concerned about. But one of the when you look at most elections, the one thing that most voters end up saying is the most important to them is the pocketbook issues like jobs and the economy. And I was wondering what you've had to say about that during the course of your discussion so far on the campaign trail.
Well, one critical point, I think, is that there's an inextricable relationship between domestic economic policy and national security policy. Obviously, you can't have a strong American presence in the world without a strong domestic economy, and we most certainly do not at this point. The recovery is extremely weak and really sailing in the teeth of the Obama administration's policies. The recovery is not because of Obama; it's because it's despite him. But the relationship works in reverse as well. Without a strong American presence in the world, you're not going to have a sustained recovery here and over the long term. And I think this manifests itself in a whole range of issues, energy policy, a whole range of regulatory issues domestically. I do think, obviously, it's important for any would-be candidate for president to address the whole range of issues. And while I'm just in the consideration stage, I did look at this in the 2011-2012 cycle and concluded that anybody who does run has to be a 360-degree candidate. And if I were to make that decision, I would be prepared to do that. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by some of the finest economists in the United States at AEI. I read their materials carefully, and I'd be happy to debate domestic issues. I'm basically pretty libertarian on economic and fiscal policy. I think one of the things that a new president would have to do would be to demolish whatever new regulatory structures Obama sets up in his last 2 years, go after Dodd-Frank, obviously repeal Obamacare and the deadweight loss that imposes on the American economy. And it's important to do it. I hope we have enough time, given Europe's economic weaknesses and China's economic weaknesses.
Okay, now tying back into this idea, which I completely agree with, by the way, that foreign policy and your stance on other shores affects how effective you're going to be here. The next president, whoever he or she may be, is not going to be able to avoid having a lot of decisions to make regarding the military, the use of American military, coordinating with foreign forces at times. You're jumping in, assuming you decide to do this, into a pretty crowded field. And I know that you have a background. You served yourself in the National Guard. There's a couple other candidates who have also served. There are plenty who haven't. And I'm just curious, this is an ongoing debate we see every election cycle. In order to be the commander-in-chief, do you think it brings value to have that service, and at what level? Because the two schools of thought are, some argue that in order to command the troops, it helps to have been one of the troops. Others have argued that the difference is so great between command and serving, particularly further down the food chain, like I was an enlisted man myself, that it doesn't really apply, so it shouldn't matter. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that having served in uniform, does that bring something extra to the table?
Well, I think it does. I was an enlisted man myself in the Guard and Reserve, and I think it's part of what makes up somebody's character. I mean, if you took the position that only somebody who had a commanding role in the military, though could go on to be president, you would eliminate 50% of the population for a good long way into the future. That's changed, obviously, but I don't think that's right. I think fundamentally being president is a question of judgment and vision and character. I think being in the military helps shape people's characters. I have to say I'm disturbed at the trend we've seen that really separates the professional military so much from the rest of the population. And despite my libertarianism and despite the fact that when I was in a position to have to decide I was against the draft, I'm not at all sure I believe in that anymore. I think if people don't understand what goes into defending the country, as a nation, we are at risk. It's not a question of an individual, it's the nation as a whole. But I don't think anybody should be excluded from consideration for the presidency, even if they never did serve. They can still learn through their work and professional experience. But they have to demonstrate they understand what's at stake. And that's the fundamental problem with Obama. He wasn't qualified in 2008, and even after 4 years of on-the-job training, he didn't get any better. That's why we're at such risk with 2 years remaining.
Yeah, and actually that leads to a question to a question I had, Ambassador, and that is an experience issue. And you had a great deal of experience in the State Department and as ambassador to the United Nations, and and in your career before that, the other candidates, potential candidates, have had experience on the political side of things. In your mind, what is the best experience for someone looking to run for president? I mean, we have senators who are looking to run most of whom don't have any executive branch experience. We have governors who are looking to run, who obviously do. And then there's someone like yourself who worked in the executive branch at a high level, for many years. I mean, what do you think is the best mix of experience for someone who's going to be president?
Well, I don't think there's one right answer to that question. I do think I'm different from the others in that I've been been privileged to serve at very senior levels, including at the Justice Department, I might add, in the federal government in Washington, which the others have not. And, a little-known fact, apparently, is that the president is the head of the executive branch. And being governor is not the same as being in the executive branch in Washington. I think it's important to have people wherever they come from who understand that the job of the president is not just to talk about getting from A to B, but actually to get from A to B. That is another of Obama's problems. He lives in a world of words rather than a world of actions. And he seems to think that when he says something, that's all that he needs to do to make it real. And obviously that's far from fact. But he's gone through 6 years with the media covering for him and not really judging his performance. I just don't think we can afford another 4 or 8 years of that kind of job description once he leaves office.
Well, that's another great lead-in. I'm glad this is flowing so well, because what I wanted to ask you was, one could certainly make the argument that in 2012, the country was already in somewhat of a state of crisis. We were facing a lot of problems, and I think a reasonable person could also argue that a lot of those problems were brought on by the leadership that we had and the policies that were being followed. You considered a run in 2012, but in the end, you wound up deciding not to do that, and you endorsed Mitt Romney. Now, there are still certainly challenges. If you decide to go ahead this time, what's the deciding factor? Why would you pull the trigger now, but what held you back then?
By the time I had the bright idea about running in the 2011-2012 cycle and thought it through and did the due diligence that I think any responsible person should do, it became clear that I was far too late in the effort to mount a serious campaign. There's a finite point beyond which there's just simply not time for anybody to do a campaign effectively. And for me to have gone ahead then would have risked the kind of embarrassing loss that would have given people who subscribe to the conventional wisdom the ability to say, see, we told you, nobody really cares about foreign policy. Now, I think in the interim, obviously with the PAC and the Super PAC raising over $7.5 million for the 2014 House and Senate elections, I've overcome one of those obstacles. I think I can raise money, but it's a hard decision. The issue for me is, what is the most effective way to get national security into the center of the debate? And it's not a matter of egotism for me. I'm as ambitious as any of the 40 or 50 other people considering running for president. But to me, it's more about the country, because this obviously has political implications. But the damage that Obama has done to the country by his disinterest in foreign affairs and his misbegotten policies is very serious, and we just have to correct that in 2016.
So, you actually mentioned the time issue, in 2011, 2012 being a factor, for in your decision making then. So I guess the natural question at this point is, what are your, you've been in Iowa, you've been in New Hampshire, you've actually been in New Hampshire several times, because as I recall, you endorsed Scott Brown and you did some campaigning with him when he ran. What are your immediate plans, that might ultimately lead up to you deciding, yeah, I'm going to go with this, or, no, I'm going to stay out of it again this time?
Well, looking at all of the factors you have to put together, the fundraising factor, the organizational factor, the strategic factor, that sort of thing. I don't need to take a lot of public opinion polls to tell me what I believe. Fortunately, I've got that part resolved. But it's a difficult road. I mean, we've already had Mitt Romney drop out even before he formally got in. So I expect to see a lot of changes and ins and outs in this campaign. And that's why I really don't have a particular timetable. I think things are so up in the air. I think the field is so fragmented. I think people are so eager in the Republican Party for a wide-ranging debate on all the issues, so that we avoid the mistake we've made in the past of following the rule that the next guy in line gets the nomination. Running against Hillary Clinton, if, as appears likely, she gets the Democratic nomination, is really going to be a very formidable task. And so the important thing, I think, is not to make a quick decision, both either for myself or for the party as a whole, but to make the right decision.
Okay. You've brought us down to the last thing that I discussed this with Doug that we want to ask, because I think anyone, whether they're considering perhaps running to be mayor of their hometown or on the school board or for Congress or all the way up to the White House, needs to be able to answer. And I'm always curious, the job of being president, I don't know if anyone's actually enjoyed it all that much since Teddy Roosevelt. It's challenging. It's demanding. It's 24 hours a day, thanks to a very liberal media, particularly if you're a Republican or a conservative. It's frequently a thankless job. You're constantly attacked. You're going to be pitted at odds with Congress, which is largely dysfunctional 99% of the time, trying to get anything done. A country with a lot of issues and a world that creates many issues that are beyond your control. Ambassador Bolton, I just wanted to ask you one question before you go. Why do you want to be president?
Well, to me, the threats that the United States faces around the world that we have not addressed, certainly not addressed anywhere close to adequately in the last 6 years, and the prospect of that continuing really raises the question whether America will continue to be the world's most important country, and therefore whether freedom in the United States and thus the whole world is coming under greater threat than we've seen in a long, long time. I think that requires sacrifices by all of us as Americans that we haven't been willing to endure in the past couple of years because our leaders haven't talked to us about them. So whether I run or not, the problems confronting the country are going to be there, and that's what I've spent a good part of my professional career working on. I expect to spend time on it right until the end, and this is just part of the process, really, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, we've been speaking with John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations and